Hello, everybody, and welcome to this interaction with Mr. T.S. Vishwanath, co-founder and partner of We Communicate in our podcast series, which is titled K-Hub. Mr. Vishwanath has for over 3 decades analyzed the impact of multilateral and bilateral trade agreements and global economic policies for the industry in India. He has engaged with different stakeholders, including the departments of the Indian government, on issues related to bilateral, regional, and multilateral trade and investment agreements. He assists industry across sectors in studying and interpreting issues of competitiveness, including global economic trade and regulatory policies. Mr. Vishwanath is a founding member, past president and director general of the Public Affairs Forum of India. He's also principal advisor at ASL Legal, a law firm which is focused on trade policy issues. From 1999 to 2009, he has worked with the CII in various capacities, including head of CII in Geneva, Switzerland, senior director at CII for trade policy and international divisions. And then he joined ASL Legal, as we mentioned. He was also an economic journalist before joining CII from the mid-1980s and covered a variety of diverse trade and economic policy issues for some leading Indian economic dailies. So over the past few years, we are seeing a very welcome trend in how the world is viewing the Indian economy and Indian business environment for investment. And we have also seen some good, uptick in our trade. In this context, we will be discussing India's current stature in the global trade environment with Mr. Vishwanath and what it portends for our future as a nation. Welcome, Mr. Vishwanath, to our series. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Bari. Thank you for having me on your show.
Sir. So my first question to you is, what is your view of India's level of export competitiveness today, how it has actually improved over the past 5 years?
So, thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. When you look at export competitiveness, I think we should look at 3 or 4 important areas where India has developed. And I think the first and foremost, and where we have made the most significant progress, is in the area of standards or technical regulations. If you realize over the last few years, both industry and the government have been focusing on building that. And the reason why I point that out as the first and most important issue is because once your standards of your products are at par with global standards, then your competitiveness in terms of exports increases far better. So I think over the past 5 years, we have seen a significant increase in the number of products that have been brought under technical regulations. And I think we have had Minister Piyush Goyal really asking for that, pushing for that. And I think that certainly helped. We had the Confederation of Indian Industries start the standards conclave about 4 or 5 years back. And the idea was to do that. I've been part of this process for over the last 3 or 4 years. And I think because of that, competitiveness has increased. 1. 2, we find a lot more technology intensive products now going out and getting exported. Earlier, we used to only hear of products like rice or wheat and and other areas being exported. But now we're bringing in investments. Now, for instance, if you're talking about an Apple having its investment made here just from an exports perspective, certainly our competitiveness increases far more than where we're looking at. So we are seeing a very gradual, but a very, I think, significant change in the way India is now tapping global markets. And by increasing its standards, by improving the product quality, by improving, by increasing changing the basket of exports to bring in more, manufactured products, more technology-driven products, and I think that's made a huge difference, and that's why we see export competitiveness of India increasing. Thank you.
Sorry. Hello.
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you for that response. So how do you think the government policies, especially the PLI or other policies which you'd like to mention, have led to a rise in competitiveness and also possibly attracted investments in the economy? And any specific suggestions for the PLI scheme, because it has not obviously given the same results across sectors. So anything which you would like to say in that regard?
Sure, Mr. Bari, the issue here is PLI was not focused on exports, and we can't do that because exports cannot be incentivized. And I don't think India is even looking at incentivizing exports. So I want to make that very clear right in the beginning that a PLI scheme is not meant for exports, more for bringing in high level, high technology, and far better investments into the country for the domestic market. And I think from that perspective, surely the PLI is helping. I mean, in terms of trying to identify newer investments, bringing in far greater investments, and identifying sectors which are significant for India. So other than just being export competitive, the second thing which something like a PLI is doing is improving domestic industry for the domestic market. And when your domestic market products improve, naturally the other products which are made for exports also improve. So while we are only incentivizing for domestic production and domestic sale, not for exports in any way, because we cannot be incentivizing exports in any way, and we are not doing that. But at the same time, I think whatever different schemes that we're looking at, including a PLI or in other areas, I think that is certainly helping in bringing in and attracting investments for improving competitiveness of products in the domestic market. And I think that's a good thing, because the moment you do something like that, it becomes far more easier for us to build scale and then to try and see how do we become far more competitive in global markets and bring in far more technological-driven products into the market. Thank you.
Thank you. And you have had extensive, years of experience in the areas of SPS TBT measures. So do you see any worrying trends post-COVID on SPS TBT measures? Something which you would like to say is of a concern India should address?
No, I don't see any worrying trends per se. What I think the SPS and TBT what has happened, I think, post-COVID, is countries have now started realizing the importance of having a strong SPS and TBT regime. But I think at the same time, the Ministry of Commerce, some years back, and nearly about 8-10 years back, started the process of identifying SPS and TBT measures, which are important and which will have an impact on India's exports. If India doesn't match those standards which somebody is bringing in, or to try and see if a particular SPS measure is not fair enough under the WTO agreement. So all these SPS, so they had set up this, the system by which we were responding, and a firm as ASL Legal, we were involved in the process of assisting the Ministry of Commerce in doing that. We did it for close to 10-11 years. And where we helped them in trying to respond on all SPS and TBT measures. So I think post-COVID or even pre-COVID, I think the SPS and TBT measures, while the numbers haven't increased, but I think the understanding of SPS and TBT measures and its impact for exports has grown. So it's not worrying. I think companies are now getting far more aware of the need to understand. And I think if there are companies and sectors which have still not followed it, I think post-COVID, it is very important now if you want to tap global markets, for companies to understand that and to follow it and to take help if they require any assistance from anybody who understands this area, that take the government's help, take an experts' help, to try and understand how it impacts their markets and their exports out of the country. So I think that would be my view in terms of how SPS and TBT have moved.
Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. Now, coming to the area of free trade agreements, where a lot has been talked about, and we have signed 2, and we are aggressively looking to sign agreements. What is your view on how FTAs can actually help exports? Because the standard discussion is that we already have very low tariff barriers. So how does it actually enhance our competitiveness in the markets we are looking at, particularly like EU or like the UK, etc.?
I think what FTA does, Mr. Bari, is that it brings in an ecosystem which helps companies understand markets better. It helps build linkages between two markets. So it's not just about a reduction of tariff, which is important, which could have been even, when a GSTP was available under the UN system earlier for LDCs, or a GSP was available to countries like India when we were trying to export out of India. But I think what an FTA does is it comprehensively links to markets. And I think that helps you in focusing and accessing those markets better and build value chains across. I think the future of manufacturing or even services is all about value chains. As you would know very well, better than me, maybe, is the fact that services account for a very large portion of any manufactured product. So when you're building value chains, it's not just about, are you building just a vehicle, but, there are so many other things that go into a vehicle. And when you have an FTA, what that helps in is in building those value chains, linking markets, bringing in technology, bringing in investments, greater transparency about each other, understanding each other's markets far better. Companies can start tying up with each other far better. So all of that, that's an ecosystem which gets created when we sign FTAs. And I think that's what we see the Commerce Ministry now trying to do, especially by identifying markets that are of deep interest to us. So if you look at the UK, for instance, or Australia, for instance, so these are markets which can provide a huge area of exports for us. And, it could, at the same time, we could have complementary imports coming in. We could build value chains across these two countries. So from a geopolitical perspective and from an economic perspective, I think these are extremely important. I think when we started in the early 2000s, when we looked at FTAs, it was more a geopolitical position rather than an economic position. But I think what we see over the last 4 or 5 years is that we have now moved that saying that it's not just geopolitical, but it should also be an economic benefit that we should be getting out of the FTAs. And that's what I think is happening, especially if you look at Australia, you look at UK, you look at EU, you look at EFTA. You look at most of the other countries that we are talking about an FTA with. I think a GCC. You can the list can go on, and these are all strategically very important partners for us from a geopolitical position, but at the same time, from an economic position, by just doing that, and the fact that, which I said earlier, that our products are becoming far more competitive because of the various decisions that we have taken, I think the FTAs can really benefit India in building value chains and establishing sustainable exports out of India.
Right, that's excellent, sir. Thank you for that. I also wanted your view on, obviously the FTAs are no longer just about trade negotiations. Nowadays, we are looking at comprehensive economic partnerships. In trade, we are looking at the issues with the WTO. We are looking at, multilateral kind of agreements happening. We have the likes of, countries like US, India, Australia. They're forming separate groupings of their own. Then issues like CBAM and e-commerce in particular have come up in trade. So what areas do you feel are going to become very important in trade agreement negotiations in the future, even considering, the other countries which are signing trade agreements? How is the nature of trade agreements changing?
So I think I'm going to speak basically from an industry perspective, from an exporter's perspective, from a trade agreement. What is it that they should now start looking at? As you very rightly said, tariff barriers, I don't think are something which we should now be talking about, unless there is a significant tariff barrier. Like if you would want to export, let's say, rice to Japan, then it's not going to be an easy one. There would be a tariff barrier rather than just an SPS and TBT, but there would also be a tariff barrier. So we could remove some of those products out. But I think from an FTA perspective, if as an industry, as a sector, if I have to look at an FTA and see what should I be understanding, where should I need help for me to navigate through the FTAs to try and get access, I would put 3 or 4 things there. First is investment, because as you said, it's becoming far more comprehensive. So, can we build value chains through the investment model? And is that something which is good for India, not good for India? Is it good for my sector, not good for my sector? So once you're able to understand that, and then to go back to the government and explain your position there would be very important. 2, the world is moving towards sustainability, climate change, sustainability, environment issues. So, suddenly you will find that, you're talking about wanting to be, exporting, your tariffs are not high, you're meeting the SPS-TBT targets, but suddenly you find you're falling short on some of the sustainability targets that the other country may have set. So when we're looking at a comprehensive economic partnership, let's say with the EU, for instance, there could be many areas which we should be aware of. Where is EU going? Where is UK going? Where is Australia going? Because just by saying that, oh, I meet the SPS standard, I meet the tariff standards is not enough. So you need to understand it in a far more comprehensive fashion. So I think from an FTA perspective, that is something which will come in, especially with the India-EU FTA. I'm sure sustainability will be an extremely important chapter that we'll start talking about. So that's the second one when you're looking at it. 3 is competition. How will competition play out? Because competition is now becoming an extremely important element in discussions among sectors and among companies and across the world. So I think that will become, while that was something which we have always said is outside a trade agreement, but the fact is that companies should know where you stand vis-a-vis that. It may not be part of trade agreement, but where do we stand in terms of it? The fourth, I think, which is very extremely important, is this whole issue which India has been, for instance, the India-UK FTA is taking a longer time, is all about mobility of professionals. I think countries and companies need to clearly understand that under an FTA, it is not about labor mobility. It is about mobility of professionals to go and take a project there, do the project, and then come back. It's not about, people immigrating to another country. It's not about that. It's not about immigration. And I think industry, once it understands it, it can explain it to the industry on the other side. And saying, and therefore, which they can then tell their other governments to say that they must learn to differentiate mobility of professionals under an FTA and differentiate it from a mobility of people who are going to go and settle in that country for immigration, right? And I think, so these are some very critical issues. If this opens up, it allows companies, companies to hire the right person for a service or for something else, for moving from one country into another. So I think it's a far more comprehensive thing. You can't just say that, it is about selling, a particular product, a particular pen into UK. But, the whole idea of, if you're having an FTA, the whole ecosystem has to work together. You have to understand each other far better. You have to understand transparency. You have to realize that there is a whole value chain that we have to work towards. And I think that's where I think countries are unable to understand. They think when India goes and talks about movement of professionals under Mode 4, they start thinking we're talking about immigration people. No, we're not talking about that at all. We're talking about something else. When we're talking about investment, we're talking something else. When we're talking about competition, we're talking something else. When we're talking about sustainability, it's something else. And since countries are at different levels of development, to understand and appreciate it, and to come up with an agreement that helps both countries access each other's markets better, would be very important. And it's very important for industry to understand it in a larger sense. My understanding, and I may be wrong here, is a lot of industry in India and across the globe, it's not just in India, but across the globe, don't understand this finer nuances of an FTA. They just think that an FTA means, you can just start flooding the other market with products. No, it has a much larger nuance. And I think that's something which companies will need to understand and seek assistance if they're not able to do that.
Thank you, sir, for that. I have just one final question for you, where I would like to ask you, obviously the surge in interest in the Indian economy and investment opportunities over the past 2-3 years, what do you think are the key factors that are driving, basically internal as well as external? And how can India capture this opportunity to accelerate its journey towards being a developed economy by 2047? What are your views on this?
I think there are a couple of things which are driving. We keep thinking it is just the large market that is driving. I don't think it is just not the large market that's driving. I think what is also driving investments and for companies to come is, one is geopolitically, India is one of the most stable countries to come to. We are a democracy and we are a plural democracy. We believe in openness. We do not believe in closing down. I think that's something. And I think we have now had all the parties in India being part of the government at some point of time or another. And we have maintained being a democracy constantly, and we're only strengthening that whole thing. So I think it's very clear for investors to know that we will remain a democracy, right? So I think that's a very important part in terms of where we are dealing. 2, I think, is that there is far more transparency in our policy making today. We see a lot more of stakeholder engagement. We see a lot of things on the net. It is not necessarily that you have to go and meet officials to understand what's happening. We are moving towards e-governance to a great way. And I think that helps investors understand it far better, right? There are some issues at the state level. There could be some here and there, but they're all getting sorted out. And the fact that things now get openly talked about, there's a lot more transparency, I think is certainly helping from an ease of doing business. I think that's something which is doing. So therefore, investments are there. Three, I think India is open to investments. India is not closed to investments. India has been open to investments, and I think we have made that point very clear. I think across the government, everybody, ministers, officials, everybody, whenever we go out, we speak at conferences, anything that happens, we hear them saying we are open to investments, genuine investments that are likely to come out. Now you find that, we started with one vibrant Gujarat. Now every state has something similar in terms of trying to protect investments, and they call for investors, they're asking people to come in. So they do see a lot of things happening around here, and they see there is hope that they can start working towards that. Finally, I think we are now talking also about linking ourselves to global markets. Our footprint is increasing. It's not just Indian companies are now equally global. When you look at any of the so many large Indian companies are global now. They're taking over companies outside. They are linking with other countries outside. They're buying technology from countries outside. They're investing outside. They are also taking investments from them into their own countries. So there is this whole thing which is helping in terms of building it. And I think all of this together is certainly helping us. And also the fact that geopolitically India has become a far more important and a more suitable partner for a lot of countries across the globe. I think all of this together is certainly helping us, I think, attract investments, bring in far more people to think about India as a market. And the growth of the middle class, of course, has been talked about enough, but that, of course, is certainly the first push that brings in terms of bringing investments and bringing to other areas. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, certainly, sir. I think our views resonate a lot in that regard. I mean, India was always seen as a potential alternative, so to speak, to China. But I think over the past few years, what we see is that the global drive to not be too dependent on one nation, and I think a lot more intent, as you rightly pointed out, from our government to be pro-business, to look at bottlenecks and try and resolve them, be it in terms of logistics, be it in terms of infrastructure development, be it in terms of investment facilitation. Digitization is a story which I think is resonating across the world. I mean, everybody says, India is one of the champions of digitization at present, and that has led to a sea change in a lot of sectors. So I think it was a pleasure, sir, talking to you and hearing your erudite views on these topics. It definitely opens up our mind to new, possibilities, and helps us better understand the current trade situation, which will undoubtedly be of interest to our industry members and viewers of this platform. Thank you so much, sir, for your time, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Hari, thank you for having me on this. And it's been a pleasure talking to you too. Thank you so much.